As an American and as a veteran, I must tell you that of the people I serve with, of the veterans I meet every day, and of Americans in general, none of us would have wished this on you. We would not have wished this on these children. We would not have wished this on people who have to till that soil and drink that water and breathe that air.
Welcome to 48 South 7th. I'm Julia Dupereau, and we're here talking with three guests today about the effects of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Our first guest is Doug Nelson. Hi, Doug. Hi. Doug is a Vietnam veteran, a member of the San Jose chapter of Veterans for Peace, and a Veteran Services representative with Santa Clara County. So how has your work opened your eyes to the consequences that Agent Orange has had for your fellow veterans who served in areas that were sprayed with Agent Orange during the Vietnam War?
The magnitude of the numbers of people who come to see me, not a day goes by when I don't have a veteran come in claiming something related to Agent Orange.
Wow.
The list of conditions is so long. I had to bring the list to be informed about all of them. Lately, ischemic heart disease has been made service-connected, Parkinson's disease, and several leukemias that weren't service-connected before.
Wow.
The list is long. The main one I see is diabetes and its complications.
What was the experience of returning veterans who had been exposed to Agent Orange? Were they able to get services, compensation right away?
Not for decades.
Oh, wow.
It was about the turn of this century before they started recognizing diabetes. Before, it was only chloracne, and you had to report that within a year of military service.
Wow. How has the government's approach to exposed veterans changed over time?
The government has recognized more and more conditions as being related to Agent Orange. No, in most cases, there's no causal relationship. It's a matter of a statistical correlation. Vietnam veterans are more likely to have these conditions than people who never went to Vietnam.
So do you think the U.S. government knew how harmful Agent Orange was, or did they start using the chemical without really understanding the lasting damage that it would cause?
Personally, one side of me wants to believe that they didn't know. But given corporate behavior with respect to pesticides and other things in the environment, I can't believe that the companies that produce this stuff didn't know what a powerful chemical dioxin is. Mm-hmm. This was a very crude form of dioxin. It wasn't the Roundup you buy at Orchard Supply. This stuff causes genetic damage, and it may be genetic damage that's responsible for us contracting these other diseases.
The United States sprayed 20 million gallons of Agent Orange in Vietnam during the war. What do you understand was the reason for this?
It's an excellent defoliant. It kills whatever it touches, whether it be rice paddies, jungles. In so many places, there's triple canopy jungle. And in one place in the A Shau Valley, they found that the North Vietnamese had truck parks, hospitals, rest and recreation centers, barracks. And by stripping the leaves off these trees, they could see what was going on.
Okay, so it was to destroy cover for the enemy?
Yeah, that was it.
And also food, right? Because it was also destroying food sources for...
It would definitely destroy rice plants.
Right. American veterans are obviously not the only ones still suffering because of Agent Orange. Vietnamese children are still today born with crippling birth defects, and food and water sources there are still poisoned. So as Americans, to what extent do you believe we're responsible for cleaning up this mess that our government made?
I think we are responsible. It should be treated like a Superfund cleanup site in this country. There have to be ways of dealing with that. It's a scientific challenge, certainly. But we need to help these people deal with it. We need to help them with the children with birth defects. I believe personally we are responsible for this. I think when we go to war, we tend to look at the enemy as being less than human, and that's the source of the problem. That whatever you do to them is all right, and whatever means you employ to win the war is fine.
Right.
We need to be aware of this kind of thinking and recognize it when we see it. When we think our country is doing something like this, we have to be informed and we have to speak out.
What should we do in terms of this particular problem, Agent Orange, that's still causing problems in Vietnam almost 40 years after the war? What should we do?
Our technology caused this. We're going to have to employ technology and good scientific minds to address this.
Okay, our next guest is Phuong Quoc. Phuong, welcome. How did you and the media nonprofit, the media strategy nonprofit that you work with, Active Voice, become a part of this international effort to repair the damage caused by Agent Orange in Vietnam?
Well, I first got somewhat involved and was aware of the Ford Foundation's effort to address the issue directly before I joined Active Voice. And I joined about a year ago because I wanted to be a part of the national partnerships of nonprofit organizations across the U.S. that's really behind the Ford's effort to address the issue directly and promote solutions and ways to help family and children in Vietnam. I was also interested in social media and multimedia and how media is used to tell stories and to help promote social change and public policy. So Active Voice was brought on because it's got a long, very successful reputation of putting the human face on public policy and being able to use films primarily to tell a human story that helps to shape public change issues. And on this particular issue, we're working on a multimedia strategy to address Agent Orange and to build public U.S. awareness.
You and I are only human. We can't change the past. We can only change the future. Let's start now with the future of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Agent Orange was an herbicide contaminated with dioxin, the most deadly chemical humans have ever created. Dioxin causes birth defects, cancer, and other diseases. During the Vietnam War, 20 million gallons of Agent Orange were sprayed at 50 times the concentration recommended for killing weeds. 5 million acres of forests and crops were ruined, along with the lives of millions, both Vietnamese and American. People like you and me. Both Vietnam and the U.S. have made strides to help the afflicted, but more needs to be done. Dioxin remains toxic for decades, especially in hotspots throughout Vietnam, and its effects are passed on from generation to generation. The past is over, but the human suffering caused by Agent Orange is not. Decades later in Vietnam, the food chain is still poisoned at the hotspots. Babies are still born with severe birth defects. People are still getting sick from the dioxin. It's tragic, but we can change that now. We can clean up the toxic hotspots. We have the methods. We can provide human resources to improve the quality of life. We can renew natural ecosystems for a healthier food chain. Most of all, we can restore hope and dignity to the Vietnamese families affected by Agent Orange and prevent future generations from suffering. You and I are only human, but together, we can make Agent Orange history.
Great. So what is Agent Orange and what kinds of problems exist in Vietnam as a result of its use?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not an expert at all on this issue. I came into it because of work and because of my own personal interest in the issue, and I'm learning a lot as I go along. But Agent Orange is, from what I'm learning, is a humanitarian concern that we can all do something about. Agent Orange itself is a toxic herbicide that was used by the U.S. military during wartime, and 20 million gallons of it was sprayed in a landmass about the size of Massachusetts. Wow. And about 4.5 million people were exposed to Agent Orange. It's estimated that 3 million people suffered from some sort of health effects because of it. And today there are at least 150,000 children who are either born with birth defects or will later experience some sort of illness or health problems because of Agent Orange. So 3 and 4 generations later, there are still the effects of it in Vietnam.
Wow. So after you left Vietnam as a refugee as a young child, your first visit back was actually as a college student in 1996 when you studied abroad there and worked with orphans in Saigon. What signs of the Agent Orange legacy did you see on that trip, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, I was 19 years old at the time, and it was my first time back, and really, I think as a lot of Vietnamese American in my generation, we want to just go back to find out where we were born, or our connection to our culture and history and where our parents came from. So I hadn't ever heard of Agent Orange before, and seeing firsthand the amount of babies with disabilities and deformities who were abandoned by their parents and left in these orphanages was shocking, and not being able to connect it directly to the legacy of the war. But over time, as I was studying about it, it's very obvious that there is a connection. And I remember seeing a lot of baby fetuses in jars in the museums as a way to educate people, the public, about the issue. So it's very visible and very current in Vietnam still, and not so much well understood in this country.
Right. The U.S.-Vietnam Dialogue Group on Agent Orange or Dioxin recently released a plan of action for finally solving the Agent Orange problem in Vietnam. Can you tell a little bit about that group and the plan of action?
Sure. The group was established in February 2007 as a citizens-to-citizens group from the U.S. and Vietnam side. There are 5 prominent leaders from both sides who are part of the group, and they've met regularly in Vietnam and in the United States for the past 3 years to really just establish a conversation about this and to just build better ties between the two countries to look in the future and look towards the solutions. And based on their long efforts, this summer they'd released a plan of action, which is available online and is public right now for people to just read and understand and learn more and see what the actions are that is underway. And it's a 10-year plan. It's estimated to cost $300 million, and it's an effort from both the U.S. and Vietnam side, and the commitment from the dialogue group.
Okay. What are some of the steps that need to be taken that the plan outlines?
There's remediation, environmental remediation. There's setting up laboratories in Vietnam, so testing on the soil can be done in country. Okay. There's a piece on building schools and clinics for children and children and family who have been affected by Agent Orange. And the piece that we're working on at Active Voice is building U.S. public awareness.
Okay. So what progress has been made already on this issue, and who have been the key players in achieving that progress?
There's been a lot of great progress on the policy side. So the Congress had appropriated $3 million earlier this year that would go to address the environmental remediation and setting up health programs in Da Nang, which is the primary hotspot in Vietnam that was most heavily sprayed during the war. Okay. And later on, the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee allotted another $12 million. So in total this year, there's $15 million from our government to address the issue, which is more than ever in U.S. history's past.
Great.
And earlier this summer, Secretary Hillary Clinton was in Vietnam on July 22nd. She was in Hanoi, and in her address, she said that she will work to make positive progress towards this issue. And U.S. Senator Tom Harkin led a group of senators to Vietnam, and they were able to see the hot spots and visit with families and children. So there is strong policy efforts, and there's also a lot of good media and press out about solutions and ways to help, as well as an engagement effort with the young Vietnamese American generation.
Great. So what do you see as your role in this ongoing effort?
Well, I hope to continue to help people understand it more in the United States, and especially the young Vietnamese Americans who were either born in this country or born too young and left Vietnam too young, like I did, to really know much about the issue. Right. And to help people host events, continue with the dialogue, just understand ways that they can get involved as an individual or as part of a community to address the issue.
And Active Voice recently got support from the Ford Foundation to create a website, makeagentorangehistory.org. So how did that get started, and what do you hope to do with the Make Agent Orange History project?
Yeah, the website is designed to help highlight solutions and stories of individuals, champions on the issue, people who've been really addressing the various aspects of the issues, like the environment and the health aspects. It's to highlight stories of children and families who have been living with dignity throughout, their pain and suffering. And it's an opportunity for us to bring awareness in a more positive way and addressing it as a humanitarian concern. And just really focusing on the solutions and what we can do. So along with that, there's also a whole social media effort, which is going to hopefully reach a broader audience, especially a younger audience, through Facebook and YouTube and Twittering.
Great. So what are some of the things that individual citizens can do to help make Agent Orange history once and for all?
Yeah, it's all listed on our website, and actually the website will be fully launched later this fall. It's still in an interim phase. The easiest thing to do is to help spread the word, to learn about it through the website or through other websites that are linked on ours, and just to learn what you can do and share it with friends. You can host an event in your community, maybe with your student organizations through your campuses, and we can help do that. There's definitely ways to donate, and not massive, overwhelming sizes, but $100 will buy a wheelchair for a child in need, and we break it down in terms of what small dollar amounts can provide for families and children. And there's also opportunities to volunteer in Vietnam. There's a lot of need for physical therapists and occupational therapists and other forms of social work and medical training that's needed to help really address this issue.
Our next guest is Dee Tran. Dee, welcome.
Thank you.
So you grew up in Vietnam and came to the United States as a refugee at the tail end of the war in 1975. What do you remember hearing or observing about Agent Orange in those years that you were there during the war?
Well, I left Vietnam at the age of 12, and so I didn't remember a lot about what was going on. And also I grew up in an area in which I grew up in the city, so there was no spraying of Agent Orange at all. But my dad's hometown was one of the places where it still remains today one of the hotspots in Vietnam, in Hoi An, Da Nang area. Yeah.
And did you hear about that when you were a child? Did your dad talk about that at all, or what was the kind of understanding in your community about what was going on?
Yeah, as a kid, I think it was sort of a part of the vocabulary for a lot of Vietnamese kids and also Vietnamese adults, that words like napalm and Agent Orange and Huey and all those were parts of the vocabulary that we grew up with because of the war. Yeah.
Right. So you're sort of a pioneer in the Vietnamese American media and journalism. How did you first get involved in newspapers here in California, and what has been your work since then?
Well, my first job in the United States was actually selling the San Francisco Examiner at the street corner. My first job in America when I was about 12. Yeah, my first job here. And then from there, I started at college as an engineering major, but I got so bored, so I switched over to journalism. And from then on, I've been involved with journalism ever since. And toward the latter part of my journalism career, I got more involved with Vietnam issues. And so about 10 years ago, I was at the staff writer at the San Jose Mercury News, and they were starting a Vietnamese language publication, and so I became involved with that, and I became its founding editor and publisher.
Oh, wow.
And about 5 years ago, I started another publication called V Times, which I still have to this day. It's a Vietnamese language publication here in Santa Clara County. And I got involved with the Vietnam Reporting Project when Professor John Funabiki, who's the head of the Renaissance Journalism Program at the Journalism Center at San Francisco State, talked to me about this project he was starting called the Vietnam Reporting Project, which is a project about Agent Orange, which is going to do reporting and other multimedia projects about. It's an exciting project. So.
Yeah. So you're now on the staff of that project, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what does that project do exactly? What's it all about?
Well, it's basically it involves it's a collection of 15 journalists from various media, from everything from radio to television to multimedia to print journalism to photography, and they're sent to Vietnam for about 10 days to do reporting on Agent Orange to various parts of the country, and to do reporting on various projects about Agent Orange. And then their work eventually will be distributed throughout the United States, in various medium and media, both in various newspapers and radio and television networks. And it's quite a distinguished group of journalists. We have actually 2 journalists who are Pulitzer Prize winners, including Nick Ut, who took the famous photo of the Napalm Girl, the famous photo of the Vietnam War. So he will be going in October.
So why is Agent Orange contamination the issue that you've chosen to devote yourself to?
Well, I think, for one thing, it's a humanitarian issue, and I think it really touches to the core of what was wrong with the war, the Vietnam War in the beginning. But I think I look at it another way is that Agent Orange can have a healing effect, because I think it's an opportunity for 3 sides of the Vietnam War in the United States, the South Vietnamese and the North Vietnamese, to come together and try to solve this issue, and to make Vietnam and its people whole again. So
how can journalism help with this problem?
Well, I think this is an issue that happened 30, 40 years ago, but it's still ongoing today. On my last trip back to Vietnam, just in July, I visited a lot of families with children who have what's believed to be defects caused by Agent Orange, and I just see the effects are still happening today, and I think as journalists we have to bring awareness about this issue, awareness about these families who are suffering, but they do it with such incredible strength and dignity. It's just amazing. That's the thing that struck me the most when I was there.
So when you accept journalists into this fellowship, you have 15 so far, is that right?
Right.
And they go to Vietnam to report on the Agent Orange situation. What do you think they find most striking when they get there?
Well, the journalists there's still a few more going in there, and a few on the way back as we speak. But the one thing I keep hearing is that they were struck at how incredibly dignified, and graceful these families were. They are. We tend to think of them as victims of Agent Orange, but they're not. They're really strong, and they have incredible love for their children, and they work really hard to overcome these issues, and they try to overcome incredible poverty that they have, and yet they remain just incredibly dignified. That's the one thing that you see. We see a lot of hope and a lot of dignity in these families. That's really the one common denominator that we found. Yeah.
Great. So what do you hope that people will do when they read and hear these stories that these journalists are producing about this ongoing problem in Vietnam?
Well, we just hope that the increased public awareness will bring about more help toward Vietnam, and as well as there are people in the United States who have the same effects of caused by Agent Orange. The U.S. veterans as well as the former South Vietnamese soldiers here and living here, and also if we could the hope is to lobby our government to create a certain kind of policy toward helping Vietnam as well as the people here in the United States to overcome this issue.
Dee and I were back in Vietnam together in January. And one of our family visits was with a woman who looked like she was probably in her 80s, but was actually in her 60s, I believe.
She was in her 50s.
In her 50s.
Yes.
And took care. She was a volunteer during wartime, and was flagging with the smoke signals and cooking food for the soldiers, and doing this all in the jungle, and as a result was heavily sprayed, and her skin is now all just puffed up, and she had a baby who is completely disfigured and unable to sit up straight at all. He pretty much lies in bed all day long, and Americans were asking what they could do to help, and they were offering to get her a pig so that she could maybe make some income through like raising pigs. But what she really wanted and asked for was just access to fresh water. She used to hike up the mountains every morning to get her wood and her water, and because 2 Americans from Minnesota funded a well in her backyard, she was able just to walk behind her little shack home to get fresh water, and it was heaven. The day that happened for her, she said it was like she couldn't sleep plenty of nights before, and she was incredibly grateful to Americans to just like this was a dream come true for her, and it just allowed her so much more time in her day and allowed her time to be with her child. And as we're listening, half of us in the room, Americans, were sobbing. And for me, it was like totally, it was full of goosebumps because, she's grateful so much for what Americans have given her as a gift, but, not probably also, American also was there to cause a problem initially. So it's deep and it's complicated. And I think as individuals in Vietnam and even Vietnamese Americans, I don't think there is any blame on, individuals on either side for anything. It's just, I think it's just really trying to figure out what we can do now together to really address the issue in a positive way. So
yeah, that's the one thing you find about when you go to Vietnam is that there's not a lot of looking back. I think people are just looking forward. They're trying to deal with the problems they have today and how to care for their children, their families, and to move on. And the past is the past to them. And I think because of that, there's not a lot of bitterness or a lot of anger, but it's just a lot of hope and a lot of optimism in really extremely dire circumstances. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think Americans are definitely very welcome back in Vietnam with open arms. Vets or non-vets, Vietnamese Americans are all coming back.
It's a matter of a statistical correlation. Vietnam veterans are more likely to have these conditions than people who never went to Vietnam.
So do you think the U.S. government knew how harmful Agent Orange was, or did they start using the chemical without really understanding the lasting damage that it would cause?
Personally, one side of me wants to believe that they didn't know. But given corporate behavior with respect to pesticides and other things in the environment, I can't believe that the company... As an American and as a veteran, I must tell you that of the people I serve with, of the veterans I meet every day, and of Americans in general, none of us would have wished this on you. We would not have wished this on these children. We would not have wished this on people who had to till that soil and drink that water and breathe that air.
Hey, welcome to 48 South 7th. I'm Julia Dupereau, and we're here talking with three guests today about the effects of Agent Orange in Vietnam. Our first guest is Doug Nelson. Hi, Doug.
Hi.
Doug is a Vietnam veteran, a member of the San Jose chapter of Veterans for Peace, and a Veteran Services representative with Santa Clara County. So how has your work opened your eyes to the consequences that Agent Orange has had for your fellow veterans who served in areas that were sprayed with Agent Orange during the Vietnam War?
The magnitude of the numbers of people who come to see me, not a day goes by when I don't have a veteran come in claiming something related to Agent Orange.
Wow.
The list of conditions is so long. I had to bring the list to be informed about all of them. Lately, ischemic heart disease has been made service-connected, Parkinson's disease, and several leukemias that weren't service-connected before.
Wow.
The list is long. The main one I see is diabetes and its complications.
What was the experience of returning veterans who had been exposed to Agent Orange? Were they able to get services, compensation right away?
Not for decades.
Oh, wow.
It was about the turn of this century before they started recognizing diabetes. Before, it was only chloracne, and you had to report that within a year of military service.
Wow. How has the government's approach to exposed veterans changed over time?
The government has recognized more and more conditions as being related to Agent Orange. No, in most cases, there's no causal relationship